Pershing's orderlies at his headquarters in France during World War I, and how he handled them when he finally, before he retired. The general attempted to find a place for each of the men that belonged to his headquarters, and he asked each of a series of generals who were his friends to take one of them as his orderly. And General Craig, Maitland Craig, was asked to take Sergeant Bailey, and he did so. So Sergeant Bailey went with General Craig from that time on until later at 9th Corps headquarters, where he was reassigned to the Field Artillery at Monterey, California. In writing there, Bailey once told me a story of his service in Captain Summerall's battery when it was stationed at Fort Myer, Virginia, during which time it did its field training at Topihanna in Pennsylvania. Once, while there, the men who had been training very hard fired their weapons and about finished the time spent in the field camp prior to returning back to Fort Myer. And the first sergeant decided that the men had done very well and they ought to have a little relaxation. So a barrel of beer was bought and duly delivered in a little grove of trees near the camp. And all the men after supper went down there with their canteen cups to celebrate their soon departure back to Fort Myer. And they went by and they drew from the spigot of the barrel a cup full of beer. And just as they'd finished it, and all of them waiting the signal to do the drinking, Captain Summerall arrived and said, "Attention!" They all came to attention, holding their cups so they wouldn't spill their beer. He said, "Turn those cups upside down." He said, "We turn the cups upside down." He said to the first sergeant, "Turn on the spigot." He turned on the spigot. And the captain stayed there till all the beer had run out. He says, "Sergeant, form the battery and march it back to camp." He says, "Damn his soul, we didn't get a drop of beer out of that whole party." The Olympic equestrian team of 1924 showed at the New York Madison Square Garden horse show in November of 1923. There was a contest in the show which was held partly outdoors in Central Park, where the entries were put over a 22-mile course, somewhat similar to that to be expected in the Paris Games in the spring of 1924. Major Bear, the team captain, was riding a horse called Alamon, which belonged to Major George S. Patton. It was a thoroughbred horse, but its right front hoof was sort of turned in to the left, which tended to cause a peculiar action of the horse when going over the ground. I was riding a horse named Gaylord, a half-bred horse belonging to Lieutenant Ellis Jones of the 3rd Cavalry. We were on this cross-country course, and I was following Major Barry. Started about 3 minutes after he did, and he should have finished before I did. But I came upon him near the end of the jumping part of the course, and his horse was weaving. And he went into that last jump and made a very bad attempt to take the jump and fell on the far side and Major Barry fell also, and his hand was injured in the fall. I turned to try to help him after taking the jump, but he waved me on, said, "Get on the way, I'm riding my own horse," and I finished at the end in the proper time, and he came in later, and he was late. The Major was not able to ride the horse in the show ring in the final part of this three-day event, and it was arranged with the judges that Major Sloan-Doak could take his place in that phase of the contest. My horse went clean over the jumping course, but it was a young 4-year-old and had not done very well in the dressage part of the contest. And when the final decision was made, Alamon, with two riders, had won over the young horse, Gaylord. Later at Fort Myer, Major Barry was showing all the horses to the man who was the most experienced horseshoer in the entire Army, and at that time held the job of buying the horseshoes for the whole Army in the office of the Quartermaster General. I was riding these various horses, and I rode Alamon alongside the riding hall at Fort Myer, and came back to the starting point, and he turned to Major Barry and says, "That horse is lame." "No," Major said. He told me to ride him down to the far end and turn him on his forehand quickly around to the right, and then trot right back towards the two of them standing at the end of the riding hall. I did as instructed, and I could feel it in the saddle that this horse took about 3 lame steps before he straightened out into the normal trot. And Barry says, "You are right, you are right." And that day it was decided that Alamon, belonging to Major Patton, would not participate in the games abroad. He was dropped from the team. Sauve-qui-peur. Sauve-qui-peur was a small mare, bay mare, standing about 15 hands, or perhaps just a little less. When it arrived at the Presidio San Francisco to be assigned to the headquarters 9th Corps Air Stable, I selected Sauve-qui-peur and one other horse as possible polo ponies. One turned out badly because it would shy from the ball, causing you to miss a stroke. I dropped that one immediately. But Sauve-qui-peur was perfect on the ball. She was afraid of nothing and was very sensitive and could be stopped so quickly from a gallop to a halt that you'd nearly go over her head. She could turn to the right and the left on the hind quarters with ease and start almost immediately in the opposite direction of the gallop. I found that she was afraid of nothing. The stick didn't confuse her at all. Ride against another horse didn't confuse her, and so I found almost a perfect polo pony from the very beginning. She was so unafraid that you had to protect her when playing against an opponent, which I was called upon to do frequently because I was playing number 1 and my natural opponent on the other team would always be number 4. And she was so fast in turning that no other horse equaled her that played on that field at Presidio. And I had 2 years of wonderful sport playing on this little mare. She was a little horse and had been bought for $85, and since I was the one that had taken her upon assignment, I could have bought her, but I didn't feel that I should, because I thought such a perfect little horse should be available to Mrs. Craig, the general's wife, who loved to ride and had a very indifferent horse called Tramp. It was very much like its name. But I didn't realize that she was not capable of riding in this little mare, because her legs would swing around and confuse the horse, who thought he was being commanded to ride out, and instead of that, she wasn't intended to do that at all. So Mrs. Craig had very bad luck with her, and she was thrown. And the general thought she was a dangerous mare, and he ordered to be sent to Monterey, California, assigned to the cavalry station there, the 11th Cavalry. And she was, but I had a friend named Edward Fitzgerald, who was the Southern Pacific representative at Fort Mason, the port of embarkation. He was always assisting me in the conduct of Polo there, of which I was in charge, and loved to ride, and I'd take him out on Sundays sometime, and he'd ride my horse, Jimmy Battlefield, and I'd ride the little mare. And he loved her. He learned to love her, this little mare. And when I left, and he found out that all the horses were going to be sold at Monterey when the cavalry was being dismounted in World War II, he went down and he bought her at auction and wrote me that they had turned her over to a friend of his over in Sacramento, near Sacramento, where it had a beautiful home. Fitzgerald died before I ever got to see him again, and I don't know who the people were who bought little Sauve-Qui-Peur, but looking back on her from a point of view of memory of many horses, I think that she was the most remarkable little horse that I ever rode. Nothing had ever came to me as wonderful as she was. I could gallop her almost in place. I could turn her absolutely around her feet to the right on her pivot on her right hind foot, or around her left just as well. Gallop her forward, take up a full gallop, and stop so quickly that I'd almost go over her head. And she's so brave that she'd run into an horse and knock them almost off their feet, and once almost knocked her shoulder out in doing this. So I had to watch out for her myself and protect her in the game of polo. She's gone now, and I still think of her with great fondness and memories of the fine rides I had with her. Dynamite. Dynamite was a gray gelding that belonged to Raymond Belmont, who lived in Middleburg, Virginia. He was a beautiful hunter type. I would call him a middleweight. Fenced beautifully in the field, and Major Barry decided that he was the very horse that he should have for the Olympic team of 1924. So I accompanied Major Barry and Major Sloan Doak to Middleburg to look the horse over and find out if it could be bought. It was saddled, and I got on it, and I rode it around over some chestnut rail fences, which it fenced beautifully. But every time it would come down, I had the sensation that the horse would fall, but it did not do so. So I was left there at Middleburg to bring the horse back to Fort Myer, and with the horse in a boxcar of a train. They went ahead, Major Barry and Major Doak, and and arranged to have somebody, some soldier, to meet me at Alexandria Yards. I had a tough ride back, but the man was there waiting for me with a saddle, and we rode to Meyer and put in the stable. The horse was assigned to Major Doak, one of our best riders, and he handled it with great care and with great capability. And some of the shows where we showed, till finally he rode in Rochester, New York, when this same thing, this giving away, when he touched the earth after taking a jump, was so bad at one time that the horse fell to his knees and Major Doak fell with him. From that time on, the horse was assigned to me in the horse shows that he attended, and I experienced the same feeling as came down to landing over jumps at all the time. Finally, it was dropped. It cost us $2,000, I believe it was, and could not be used in the equestrian games abroad. I don't know what disposition was made of Dynamite, but I think he was signed to the Fort Riley Cavalry School. Morgan. Morgan was a bay gelding pertaining to the 16th Field Artillery at Fort Myer, Virginia, which at the time was commanded by Major Toddy George, son-in-law of Vice President Curtis. Morgan was a great jumper, especially broad jumps, more particularly than straight up and down jumps. We were at Brockton Fair, Massachusetts, and Major Barry was discussing with some of the civilian riders the question of high jumping. And he ventured that Morgan could defeat their horses if the top bars were not held in place, as was the custom in high jumping at that time. Or he could beat the horses there in a triple bar jump. So they agreed to contest it, and he put me on the horse. I had never ridden it before, and it was done in the lights at night. And the decision was to take it over the triple bars. Well, the bars were set at a certain height. I don't know what that is, I don't recall, and both horses were in the contest, took it very well, and then they began to stretch them out and raise them. Well, it was a very difficult contest, and when it ended, the civilian horse had beaten Morgan. Later, Morgan joined Lieutenant Frederick Bonnecue and me in the show, in the horse show known as Royal Olympia in London. It was our second time in that show. The three horses, Ballymacshane, Morgan, and Little Canada, constituted the team. We did exceptionally well in that show and won second place, our reserve championship, in the team event. The teams were made up of three horses twice across the course, and were only defeated by the British entry by a very small number of points. And our loss I attributed to Freddie's Ballymacshane, but who got a refusal, a little short jump that went into the arena. And if that hadn't have happened, we would have won the thing. I said, well, Freddie, why didn't you use your spurs on that jump? Well, he said, I didn't want to win everything. He had just won the previous night the King's Cup, the greatest prize in the whole horse show. So he'd won the great prize, and we had come in second in the Prince of Wales Cup, which was the second best event in the show.
The foregoing was recorded by Brigadier General Paul McDonald Robinett at Mountain Grove, Missouri, sometime during the month of December 1974. This is his brother speaking, Maurice Robinett. End. December 1974. This is his brother, H. Maurice Robinett speaking.